Guys, so after my video that I done, my latest one, which is ritualistic witchcraft versus operative witchcraft, I had a couple of emails from people basically saying, you know, I really enjoyed your videos on this subject, you know, and operative witchcraft does really entice me and stuff like that, but I'm finding it really, really hard to actually get into operative magic because I don't have access to much folk magic. Now, in terms of this, yes, it is quite tricky. I never thought of it like this, but until a couple of authors that I hadn't known about before, you know, it was quite hard coming across folk magic. But when I come across a couple of authors, a couple of good batch of authors that really did, you know, be like, right, this is folk magic, and, you know, showed it all in their books, I found it really hard. And so I feel like, you know, I kind of need to practice what I preach, and I don't actually have any videos where I demonstrate any spells, or I tell people about any spells or any rituals that you know, that you can do for specific purposes. So I wanted to just do a series, basically, and I'm planning on doing this series, and I'm going to call it a series of folk magic and witchcraft. And this folk magic that I will show people, it will be really old, you know, it will go from quite old folk magic to quite new folk magic. So yeah, I just think it'd be quite interesting. And there's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about before I go on and before I do these videos. Just a couple of sort of letting people know what can sort of help, giving people some advice as well. Now, folk magic is actually quite, you know, certain types of folk magic, particularly British folk magic, for me, finding out about was quite hard, because we do have a long history of magic and folk magic, don't get me wrong, but there's only really a couple of sources. I mean, aside from the really famous charms that we have, like the Sator Square or the Abracadabra charm as well, it's quite, you know, or the Witch's Bottle, it's quite hard and it's quite difficult in actually finding out a bit more, you know, because we have those charms to keep away evil, basically. A lot of it is all to keep away evil, to keep away black magic, to keep away evil witchcraft, you know, and so forth. So, in terms of folk magic, if you really and genuinely want to get into folk magic, I can recommend an author for you to get into. Her name is called Gemma Gary, and I rave about her, but she does 2 books that are really, really interesting. One in particular, folk magic, is called The Black Toad, West Country Witchcraft and Magic. I've actually done a review on this book, and it is on my channel, so look up the review. But this is basically a book of folk magic. It's an entire book of folk magic. That is all it talks about, is folk magic. You know, it demonstrates a lot of the old charms. You know, the author's done a research, he's gone to the Museum of Witchcraft in Boscastle, stuff like that, you know, and a lot of this is really, really old folk charms, you know, and a lot of old operative folk magic, and it's a really good book. So if you want to really get into folk magic, buy that book, because you know, it's quite hard, as I said, with folk magic. Not a lot of authors, traditional witchcraft authors, have actually, and it kind of, you know, it struck me as a bit of a surprise, but not a lot of traditional witchcraft authors have said, right, okay, we're practicing traditional witchcraft, here is all the old folk charms, all the old folk spells that have ever been, you know, in Britain, and we're going to write all this down and put it in one part. It's normally just very scattered, it's normally in historical books, you know, so it's quite refreshing to actually have somebody who has put a lot of old folk charms and old folk spells into one particular book. Now anyway, I'm going to stop on that talking about the Black Toad, because I will just basically be doing another book review on it, which is what I don't want to do. Now, what else can I recommend? Yeah, folk magic, as I said, it can be new, it can be quite, you know, it can be old, it can be quite new as well. There's a lot of modern folk magic that a lot of people don't know about, because a lot of traditional witches will go by the law of sympathia, as one of my friends refers it to, sympathetic magic. So for instance, as an example, if you want to do a binding on somebody and, you know, you want them bound, you'd make a doll of that person to represent that person, having some of that person's personal effects on that doll. And then with ivy, you know, the ivy vine that literally strangles everything and wraps around everything, you know, wrapping the doll in ivy, and as the ivy tightens around the doll, the binding work, you know, it binds that doll, it binds that person, you know, tying the doll's hands behind its back, blindfolding it so it can't see, it can't do any manual work with its hands. It's a law of sympathia. It's the way in which witches can work, so it represents something. It all has a sympathetic meaning. Another example of the law of sympathia, in traditional witchcraft, a lot of the times you will find some witches may curse using bog water, water found in bogs. Now, bogs are always associated with something really, you know, disgusting and dirty sort of places. You know, it's kind of like the really disgusting parts of the countryside. However, this goes back for when the Celts, who were in Britain, used to sacrifice, well, were said, because it's, you know, it's been documented by the Romans, and they were a bit like that with the Celts. They never really liked them much. You know, there was a bit like, you know, they adopted some of their gods, but a lot of things that are documented, a lot of people think, well, was that just the Celts doing that because they didn't have a liking? The Romans documenting that because they didn't have a liking towards the Celts. So a lot of people don't know whether or not what they've actually documented is true. However, we have found a lot of bodies, a lot of sacrificed bodies at bogs, at peak bogs. So bogs have always been associated with that sacrifice, that the witch will see bog as a place of torment, as a place of misery, as a place of death. So in order to, you know, so again there, the water there holds that death, holds that misery and that pain. So we'll use that water in order to curse or to hex somebody. Another example of that is, for instance, bees. You know, bees are said to have a queen. So if you have a bee and you speak a petition or a certain favour to a bee, the bee will then go to the queen, and the queen will grant the wish. Now, there's a lot more things involved in these. You know, there's a lot more different things and a lot more rituals. But this is modern traditional witchcraft will incorporate a lot of sympathetic magic, because it just makes a lot more sense to people. The law of sympathia, sympathetic magic, is ages and is thousands of years old. You know, people have used it for ages and ages. So in terms of modern folk magic, that's the way that we will go. You know, there's a lot of modern folk charms and folk spells that I know that will work really well, you know, as much as old folk charms. Now, as I said, buy that book, The Black Toad by Gemma Gary. I can't recommend it enough, just because she talks a lot about, you know, it's just all folk charms in it, you know, it's all folk magic, and it's really handy to have. Now, what else? Right, now, a couple of rules, ground rules for this. Do not try to change what it is. If an old folk spell says that you use a psalm, or says that you use a prayer to God and Jesus, you do that. Don't substitute what it is. These spells, these charms have worked for years upon years and have been documented for years and years and years for a particular reason, because they work the way they are. You know, it's just a bit crappy as well. It's not having, you know, in a way it's kind of not really having respect for that spell, for that particular charm. So just remember that some old folk spells and old charms will require that you say psalms and stuff like that. You know, I wouldn't substitute it for a god or anything like that. I wouldn't do that, just because that is the way they are, and you can't. You know, I just think, who am I to have a right to change years of history? I don't. That is the way they are. You know, do not substitute any of the ingredients. Again, they have gone on and gone on and gone on, all these folk charms and spells, for a particular reason, because they work. So, for instance, if something asks that you use red wine or anything like that, don't use Ribena, you know, or something like that. You know, don't do that. You know, use what it says, you know. In a lot of magic as well, you know, if you're, in terms of magic, yes, it is good to go by the spirits, it is good. If the spirits tell you something and you feel that that is right, do that, but don't substitute that on your own. You know, have enough respect for something to do that, to not do that even, sorry. Have enough respect for that spell to not do that. So no substituting. The charms and spells that I will give, do not substitute. So yeah, this is my first part of a series of folk magic and witchcraft, and I'm going to do a couple of bits. You know, I'll do some for protection, some for general cleansing, some for luck, love, cursing, banishing, stuff like that. So yeah, I hope you guys get a lot out of this video and the series of folk magic and witchcraft videos to come.